We begin with the news of excise duty cuts for petrol and diesel, which are now in effect. The Dáil voted to approve reductions last night that will see petrol and diesel lowered by 15 cents and 20 cents per litre at the pumps respectively, along with additional supports for hauliers and coach services as the government attempts to tackle rising fuel costs. Only households, though, already in receipt of fuel allowance will receive a weekly top-up payment of €38. That's despite home heating oil prices doubling since the start of the Iranian conflict. And consumer groups warning that it may be some days before cuts are reflected at the pumps. Retailers are allowed to get rid of older, more expensive stock that was brought in before the cuts were implemented. And the Tánaiste Minister for Foreign Affairs, Simon Harris, says these cuts will be effective for all.
We know the pressure that people are feeling right now. People are genuinely worried about the impact this conflict is having on their energy costs and what is facing them in the weeks and months ahead.
But what do you out there think? Are these measures enough? And who really stands to benefit? Let us know your thoughts on this. We'd love to hear from you. Do you feel the excise cuts are sufficient? Are you disappointed about the with respect to home heating oil? Let us know on 0818 400 964 or 086 1800 964. For more on this, I am joined by the Meelick Fianna Fáil TD Cathal Crowe and the Sinn Féin TD from Shannon, Donna McGettigan, who both join me on the show. And good morning to both of you. Cathal, we heard there from Simon Harris, the government, of which your party is a part of course, saying these cuts are going to make a real difference to people's pockets. I'll be interested to see what the Morning Focus listeners have to say. Do they go far enough in your view? Would you like to have seen them go a little bit further? Are you happy with what's been brought in?
Good morning, Alan and Donna. I suppose, look, the context of this is that war in Iran, which is now 3 weeks old. There's no knowing where that's going to end up. I was listening to the news overnight, and you've the President of America saying, they're at the cusp of peace talks, Iran denying that, but it's been tumultuous for the whole world in terms of the knock-on effect it's had in costs. So what I heard very clearly yesterday when these speeches were being delivered by ministers in the Dáil is that the situation is fluid. It is a crisis. We've been through crises before. I was in a backbencher in the last government during COVID and the economic crisis where we were agile. We responded to things. Some of the interventions we brought in had to be ramped up. We had to increase money we were giving to people. We had to reduce taxes. We had to take many measures to make sure that people were able to live a comfortable life and not be at the pin of their collar. I recognise that nearly everyone listening to the show this morning is finding it astronomical at the moment to run their car. So these interventions should take some of the pinch out of it, but it may not stop here. We may have to go further with these. But for now, there's a reduction in what's called a NORA levy, and as you said at the outset, there, 22 cent cut in diesel, 17 on petrol, and that all-important winter fuel allowance season extended by 4 weeks, recognising that many vulnerable people, older people, are still reliant on fossil fuels, the oil tank out in the garden, heating the stove, heating the range, heating the radiators. So we've made that change as well. This is fluid. And I heard that Taoiseach in Tánaiste last night saying this is under active review. This could change next week, the week after, if it has to. But hopefully that war will end very soon.
And I think people will be glad to hear that it is under review because, whilst the cuts are, let's focus just on fuel for vehicles at the moment, while they're welcome, I stopped this morning for fuel, diesel still, and I have to say, a lot of the petrol today, or a lot of service stations I passed by, the cuts hadn't come in yet, but I stopped at one where they had. Diesel was still around 208, 209. I got petrol, it was around 185. Still, Cathal, just before I bring you in, Donna, I'll get you in soon, still extremely high. Is it just as well the government is leaving this open-ended? Because I'm sure there's some people saying it's relief, but it's very small relief.
Yeah, so in the first instance, the suppliers, the petrol stations, if you like, many of them would have bought at wholesale prices in the last 3 or 4 days. So that cycle of fuel can be sold at that price, and it is extortionate. And I think many people are waiting for their car to run as low as possible so they can refuel at weekends. And
I have to say, Cathal, sorry to jump in again. I think people will find that frustrating that they can sell off the old stock at the increased prices, because they'll say the reverse of it. As soon as conflict broke out in Iran, it seemed like the prices started going north. There was no delay.
Yes and no. I'm not going to name specific petrol stations, but I know of several who kept prices low in the early days. They did go up, but they were paying higher at wholesale. So unfortunately, this gets passed on and on, the cost factor, and ultimately it's the consumer, and that's why we're trying to intervene at that level. People will see a reduction. The government are also keeping a very close eye on a term I used recently, and I heard a Taoiseach use it, price gouging. It has been a fact that has happened in some places, and there will be penalties, there will be follow-ups on that. But for now, the interventions voted through in the Dáil last night should either immediately, depending on where your local petrol station is at in their supply chain, but it'll either immediately take effect in some places or in the next 48 hours in others.
Okay. Donna, what's your view on this? That there are cuts, maybe they could go further, but they are welcome, and there is potential for them for further measures to be brought in once we get to the end of May if this conflict is continuing.
Well, I think the maximum support should have been brought in yesterday. This is something we've been listening to. I've been out in the door at the weekend listening to people, talking to them, and they're angry and they're upset and they're worried. But if you look at diesel up 55 cents and home heating oil nearly doubled, and this has been going on for 4 weeks while the government did it on this, and ordinary people are going to pay the price for it. And what was the answer yesterday? It was an absolute insult to people. You've 750,000 people depending on home heating oil to keep their homes warm, and the government has turned around and said they won't take any excise duty off it. They'll reduce the tax by 2 cents, like 2 cents. And what's going to happen in a matter of weeks? They're going to bring in another carbon tax hike, and they're going to take that back off you. So they're giving with one hand and taking with the other.
But at least are they leaving the door slightly ajar that they, if they feel that people aren't getting sufficient relief from that, come the end of May, they may bring in more measures to deal with home heating oil.
But that's the end of May. We're at the start of April. In between that, we've already had 4 weeks of this, and then we're going to have another 4 weeks at this. And all you need to do is look at social media. People have taken to it overnight, and they're angry. There's people out there that their tanks have run dry. Some people can't even put money in their prepay meters to keep their electricity going. Where's the help that's needed? You have carers contacting us. They're driving between homes. Vulnerable people. There's those with disabilities who are already made worse off by the last budget. We've workers, small businesses as well as struggling. Everybody seems to be hit with this, and it's just yesterday just wasn't. It wasn't.
Okay, well let me bring in Cathal back in on the home heating oil, because Cathal, and I've heard this view from people that it seems like the supports, the majority are targeted at lower income households. But what about the so-called squeezed middle, the low to middle income earners who don't qualify and who can't afford to put home heating oil into their tank? And I've friends in that situation, to the outside world, decent jobs, 2 cars in the driveway, all that kind of thing, but are really being stringent about when they put the heating on, because they only have a drop left in the tank and they just don't have the money to go anywhere near filling it.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to answer that question, but first I just think for clarity it's important to say that this hasn't been going on for a month. This war only began in the last couple of weeks. And the last war, there was a war in Iran.
To be fair, Cathal, I mean, it's gone over 3 weeks. It's not far off a month.
No, but 1 second. The last war in Iran, there was a war last June in Iran. It was a 12-day war, and it ended with a massive bomb being dropped on one of those nuclear processing plants. So that was a short war, and what government have to watch here, and this isn't maybe what everyone wants to hear, but what government have to watch is, do you go in with a big intervention for something that could be a very short-term conflict, or do you hold off for a week or two? And they did hold off for a week or two. In contrast with that, Donna's own party are not in opposition in Northern Ireland. Her party colleague John O'Dowd is the Minister for Finance there. They've done nothing there to cut excise, nothing at all. So this isn't magic wand stuff. We are trying our best to ensure that we get in here with an intervention that will make it a little bit easier for people. It remains an active situation both in the conflict, and it will remain an active situation in how we respond to it. I would hope that if this is continuing into another week...
Donna, Cathal,
if I could finish the point.
Very quickly, because Donna has to respond to you.
This is an active situation, and the response to it from the Irish government will be active too. We don't want anyone more squeezed when they go to the petrol pumps or when they're trying to refill their home heating oil tank. Okay,
Donna, do you want to respond to what Cathal's point about Sinn Féin's approach in the north?
Cathal knows well we don't control excise duty north of the border, and we don't control taxes north of the border. That's well known. We have a 12.5 billion surplus here, and the government are taking in more taxes as a result of the sky-high fuel costs. And you can be guaranteed, if developers or bankers came knocking on the door, there would be no shortage of sweetheart tax deals for them. So ordinary people out there are the ones that are struggling.
No, I wouldn't. that isn't fair. I mean, you can't always look, developers, by the way, Donna, are people who are going to build houses, and no one's saying we're going to put money in their pocket. That's ludicrous to suggest that. Can I make the point that when these debates were happening in the Houses of Commons the other night, all of your MPs, which they have been for many years now, again, were absent. They've been absent on all occasions when big decisions have been taken. Your colleagues are in government in Northern Ireland. You have the Ministry of Finance. But look, none of this matters to people tuned in Clare this morning. I want to go back, Alan, to what we're talking about here. There was an important detail we missed out, because you've had road hauliers, and we've many of them based in around Shannon and Ennis. They will also be subject to a diesel rebate, which they can backdate as far as January. So that will also allow them to get some reimbursement for the high costs they've been paying. This would apply to road hauliers, truckers, bus drivers, coach operators. So that will also help.
Carl, when the hauliers were with us and Eugene Drennan spoke with us, I think they're hoping for more longer term measures, that what's happening now as a result of the conflict in Iran has just highlighted how they need more longer term supports regardless of any conflict.
Yeah, but the whole and the answer to the next thing is above all of our pay grades this morning. But I've been listening to experts on oil pricing and how dynamic it can be. Some are saying that this war, even if this war ended today, some are predicting it could take a year for pricing to stabilise, and others are saying that prices drop overnight. We saw on Monday, and I'm not a fan of his, I'm certainly not, but Donald Trump came out with a big statement on his Truth Social that there was peace talks and efforts underway, and just like that overnight the markets opened, more stabilised, and oil dropped back. So this is very volatile, and with that our responses have to be good and measured. We were commended, it's a different government, it's a different configuration, but we were commended in the last government for being very responsive to the COVID pandemic. We made sure jobs weren't lost, we made sure the economy was shored up, that families were able to stay buoyant and not go into the economic abyss. We're going to take the same actions here, and it very well could be the case in a couple of weeks' time or 3 weeks' time. We're back into this debate again, and we're talking about another set of measures. I don't know, and a huge amount of this depends on what happens in that conflict.
And let me put that point too, Donna. Let me put that point too, Donna. I mean, Simon Harris is saying, Donna, look, offering energy supports long term, it would just be irresponsible because the situation is too volatile, and we don't know what's going to happen. You know, Cathal has mentioned Donald Trump said there's talks, although the Iranians have said that's fake news, so we don't know who to believe there. But Simon Harris's view is the situation is just too volatile for long-term measures. They can and potentially will come back to this. There could be further supports. Is that not fair enough? Take a wait and see approach?
I think that we've already had the wait and see approach, and I think I'd be very surprised if people texted into your show this morning in Clare to say that they were happy with what's happening at the minute. We've had the highest prices of electricity in Europe. So, you know, these are all things that need to be that the government should have been looking at before now. There should have been a mechanism brought in before now for targeted measures, which hasn't happened. If you even look at the three banks in the state generated 3.6 billion in profit, they pay less than 1% tax. So why not tax them more and reduce the taxes on these here to offset that? There is ways of doing this, and the government just won't. And to sit and wait, if you tell someone that has a dry oil tank, when it's freezing cold, an elderly, vulnerable person to sit and wait, I don't think that's simply good enough. And as you said, you have people that are out there, workers are also struggling with this. They just cannot afford it. They cannot afford to sit and wait. They're getting into debt, or else they're sitting deciding heat or eat. It's that simple.
And Cathal, I do take that point that you were making earlier, and indeed the taunt that he believes it's irresponsible to offer energy supports long term, but even lasting till the end of May for the so-called squeeze middle who have empty or near empty oil tanks out in the back garden or in their shed or wherever it might be. 2 months, 2 and a bit months seems like quite a long time to go even further. Who knows how long they've already been going without much home heating oil. What would you say to them?
So the whole heating situation, I mean, obviously is intertwined with the weather as well, and how temperatures rise up over the coming weeks. I think there's way more volatility in terms of the diesel and petrol we're putting in our vehicles. There will be some stabilisation, I think everyone believes, in the next 3-4 weeks on the home heating front. But we certainly don't want people to go cold, and that is why we've extended and increased the allowance that people of low income are getting in that regard. Yeah,
but what about those who are a bit higher than low income and don't qualify for that?
I'm not going to fudge this. They're not in this net. They're not in this net. And that what we've done is the fuel allowance for people who are pensioners, carers, disability people with disabilities, I should say, low-income working families. So they're the people within that net. There's a very delicate line here. I mean, inflation has risen by single digits in a matter of days, right? That is alarming, not just for Ireland, for the world. We have a supply chain issue here. We have the possibility that food prices, fertiliser price for farmers could go up. We may be at the end of this crisis if what we're hearing from President Trump is true, but we could very well be at the beginning of it. And the tightrope we walked as a country just 3 years ago, coming out of COVID, there was hyperinflation in some countries, some countries, even Finland, I was in there quite recently, they have a massive recession going on there at the moment. We're trying to tread this very fine line. It mightn't be always populist. It mightn't always win Curry in favour on the airwaves. But it's an active situation. We don't want to plunge ourselves into some kind of recession, going from hyperinflation into a recession environment. We will probably be back on this again in the coming weeks if the conflict continues on. But for now, these are the measures we're bringing in, and people should feel the positive impact of them over the coming days. But I accept this, this isn't an interview covered in rose petals. That's wonderful. There's many more things we probably will need to do. It all depends on where this conflict ends up. And we will be responsive. We will be agile. I've never sat on my hands politically, and I don't intend to now, nor do the government.
Donna, is this just another wake-up call in terms of Ireland and getting ever closer to energy independence, or as close as possible, that this crisis should be a point where we accelerate our efforts towards being able to mostly provide fuel ourselves rather than having to rely on parts of the world where conflicts of this nature can kick off without any notice and suddenly we're all plunged into chaos?
Yeah, it is a wake-up call, and it is something that we need to look at. And it isn't the first time we've been hit by this, so it definitely is something that the government needs to look at.
Just in terms of agriculture, Cathal, the IFA, their President Francie Gorman doesn't sound too happy with what's been announced for them. The cuts to agri-diesel are derisory, will have little or no impact at farm level. They wanted the carbon tax reduced, but says the government seemed to look at that or view that as untouchable. And it seems like the consumers, are going to suffer ultimately. Says the reality is that food prices will have to increase to cover these extra costs.
Yeah, there is a reduction in agri-diesel. Now, it's not to the same extent as car diesel and petrol.
Yeah, he says, sorry to cut across, just for listeners who aren't sure, he says the green diesel prices will reduce by about 3%, but the price of green diesel has increased by 50% over the past 3 weeks.
Yeah, so he's corrected those figures. The one thing I would say is that, and I farm myself, how farmers load diesel into their vehicles is quite different to the rest of us who drive cars, vans, etc. So I would have my store of diesel on the farm going back many months. Farmers would generally tend to pre-purchase. They have a tank on site. They have a nozzle in which to refuel. So they may not feel the effect. I think most farmers in Clare won't feel the effects of this for many months. So this could be one of those interventions I just referred to a moment ago where we would have to come back and look at it. But right now it's at the lower scale of intervention. But I would anticipate if we see an escalation that it will have to change because there's many fine fuel suppliers in the county who deal with the farmers. They're buying at wholesale prices that will ultimately have to be passed on. So this could be one of those interventions we will have to revisit. But right now it's at the 3% stage.
Okay, we're almost out of time. But final word to you, Donna. I mean, the government they've acted. You may not be happy with it. They have left the door ajar for further supports in 2 months' time. How would Sinn Féin have tackled this any differently?
Well, we would have put the maximum support into the reduction of diesel and petrol that's permissible. So it would have ended up around the 28 cent mark when you take into the NOR levy and the maximum support. But we would have removed all excise on home heating oil, and then we would have extended off the fuel allowance to 13 weeks, which is a targeted measure. And while that is good to see that in the government measures here, and the haulier measures, that's a welcome measure too.
Okay, look, we do.
13 weeks would have brought us up till June. Just to flag that as well. We've to take good measures here. We've to intervene, but they have to be logical. We don't want to tip our country into something that we don't want to end up in here. It has to be carefully managed. We'll probably be back here again, Don, in a few weeks debating it, but for now, these measures, I think, will make a difference. Okay, yeah, definitely sense. But we'll be speaking to the two of you again before too long on these matters, but my thanks for now. The Meelick Fianna Fáil TD there, Cathal Crowe, and the Shannon Sinn Féin TD, Donna McGettigan, with us.